about I just make a couple of remarks about my background and then I can launch
Of course,
into
please,
this?
please.
Sure, Eugenie. Actually, our lovely moderator is Mr. Göksel. He's he's the real boss. So
okay.
No.
So should you want me to introduce myself?
Please.
Yes, that would be wonderful, actually. Yeah.
Okay, just so people have an idea who they're talking to. I'm actually in my 60s now. I've been doing this for a long time. I'm from Canada. When people ask me where I'm from, I say I used to be from Canada. I spent a lot of time doing research trips in various parts of Europe, including in Russia. And then I moved to the Gulf, to Dubai initially. And I spent 9 years in the Gulf, and I'm in Glasgow right now, but I'm kind of wanting to go back. I've been adopted into a number of families in the Gulf. So I'm an auntie and a sister to quite a few people. I first went to teach doctoral students ed admin and leadership, and being Canadian, where you're supposed to be really inclusive, not what some other countries mean by it, but I mean really inclusive. I immediately, upon arrival, changed my curriculum around. So, and that's sort of what lies behind what I'm doing here. I always teach about 2/3 broad international material for the topic I'm teaching. And then if I'm in the Gulf, it's 1/3 Islamic and kind of local regional material. I do have a background in history and philosophy before going into administration and some government work. And my first introduction to the Middle East and Islam was actually in the 1970s when I was quite young, because I studied history of Islam and through philosophy of religions, also Islam again. So, and there are a lot of Muslims in Canada. So that was even before the politics. So that was just considered normal at that time. And I'm really actually grateful that I made those connections and learned what I did before the politics began. So to start with for today, it's to talk about really the kind of sustainability and rebuilding heritage in the Middle East. And there's a very, well, the Middle East and North Africa have the longest history of any of this. So this sort of, excuse me, knowledge and values, this capacity that's there is enormous, and it goes back a very long way. And many of the things that were done even 5,000 years ago in the region, if you actually study it properly, you'll find out that it isn't too different from some of the modern management admin stuff now. So anyway, I also wanted to start with some film and TV series covers, because I think probably a lot of you watch TV and film. And I was just thinking, there have actually been quite a few series and movies about pandemics, about other disasters, climate, and that sort of thing. And I actually teach with film at times. So the next slide, yeah. So there's also a huge amount of film, documentaries, and even series that come out of the Middle East and North Africa that cover a lot of incidents going back, for example, to decolonization in Algeria and other periods with Lion of the Desert. The documentaries that I've been watching coming out of Syria especially, I've had to use in my writing. But the very earliest writing in human history, the very first leadership study and the study of rebuilding a society on a stronger foundation goes back to the Epic of Gilgamesh. Not too many leadership profs start with anything going back that far, but that's actually a very interesting study of personality and character and values in good leadership. And my favorite is actually Saladin. I've got every single biography that's been published on him in English, and I've read about 7 of them, and I have a half-written chapter on using Saladin as a role model. So I've been also doing work in mentoring and role modeling, and the history of Islam in the region has, there are a lot of role models that are very good in many different ways. I had military students from Abu Dhabi in my class, and they really appreciated me selecting Saladin to talk about. Whoops. So the title here, it's looking at the kinds of regenerations or renaissances or rebuilding that have happened in the MENA region, focusing in on the values that are there, the roles people can play, and this is where the youth part comes in, as well as knowledge for rebuilding of communities. The overview here, I have 5 sections to this. What I would like to do is pause at the end of each section in case there are any short questions you might want to ask. And also, I'm assuming I designed the PowerPoint so that it would be accessible to everyone. They can download it and go back to the slides. Some slides have a fair amount of text. I'm only going to talk about some elements of the text, but it's something you can go back to. So the basic principles, this is just a very quick overview. It was the material for this program that had gone out. So in terms of defining the problem, the COVID problem and pandemic, which is not just a medical emergency, but a lot of other problems. It's a problem with individuals, institutions, and some world leaders who aren't doing a very good job right now. The other problem I think that lies in the background, there are other factors that have been in play for a while, and that is neoliberalism that arose in a number of Western countries, excuse me, and then was spread through globalization. And neoliberalism is an economic model in which economic values pretty much are the sole values that are looked at over any other values. So it's a kind of materialization of society. And what I saw when I got to the Gulf and some other areas is that globalized Western education has become the new colonizer. So in terms of goals, a lot of this has to do with innovation, but drawing on leadership, the ethics that are important, the kind of mindset that's important, and also tolerance, the common good, diversity. A lot of these values, of course, are core to the Islamic tradition and also, excuse me, core to some other humanistic traditions. And part of the goal here is that you really need many stakeholders to take part in what needs to be done in rebuilding a society after some sort of crisis. And the younger generations actually play a critical role in that, particularly when it comes to innovation and initiating things, because you do get people who get into later generations who don't really want to change what they've been doing for a long time, and they get kind of stuck in that. And the 3 key virtues for empowerment, which I've already referred to a number of these in general terms, but certainly the ability to value other people in terms of those elements of their humanity and higher order values, and the ability to have empathy for others and to overcome not just egotism, I would say it's narcissism, particularly in a number of Western countries. There's been a lot of psychology and social psychology done on the US, the UK, and some other countries. And it's gone past egotism into large numbers of narcissist behavior. And once you become a narcissist, well, we've had a world example on the stage for 4 years, an example of malignant narcissism. So one thing I just wanted to point out in the third one, the tarahum, mercifulness, to focus on your job as a person is to create the best person you can be, to fulfill your complete humanity and all those positive values. Now, I was raised in the German humanistic tradition with Immanuel Kant as an ethical guide in a very strict family. I mean, they were very serious about this. But when I came to Islam and a couple of other major world religions, I found that there wasn't that much difference if you look at that core set of humanistic values. They're in Islam as well. And the Germans particularly, in fact, many of the important scholars from the Golden Age directly influenced the development of the German Enlightenment, people like Kant and Hegel and others. But the educational concept that was embedded there is Bildung. And that is that you have to become the best person you can be for yourself, for your family, your tribe, your community, and your society. And then, of course, it's looking at the human capacity. As I mentioned before, the MENA region has an extraordinarily rich history and capacity. And there's a tendency, I think, in a lot of books and articles to assume that people were very primitive earlier on, and it's only with modernism that people have extraordinary knowledge and capability and skills. And I'm going to go back into some of what tends to be excluded or ignored. So I don't know if there'd be any questions at this point. It's still a bit early, but maybe at the end of the next section. So, okay. One of the things that's critically important to the Middle East, North Africa traditions, particularly the Islamic traditions, is that Islam was very open to knowledge in other places, providing it didn't contradict an Islamic value. And there was a huge development of capacity, knowledge, skills, how to rebuild a society, societies over and over again. And that was absorbed into the early caliphates. As the empires began to expand, one of the very pragmatic things that was done was to find the administrators and skilled people in many areas, regardless of their religious background, and to employ them and bring them into the economy, into the society, to enrich it. And I want to, so part of the value of history, these were the sort of these stereotypes that are exploded a bit in some of the cartoons that are coming out now, is that in fact, not only is early Homo sapiens much more sophisticated than we thought, but they're now finding out that Neanderthal had musical instruments, had artwork, had tools, did all that sort of thing. And we all have most people on the globe have around 2.5 to 3% Neanderthal. So Homo sapiens, the early human groups, were actually, they absorbed that in as well. So what history teaches us, history, the inspiration and the values that we hold are developed historically. That's where they come through that process. We also learn what has been possible and what key factors are involved when you rebuild a society. What are the knowledge, skills, and the cooperation values that were necessary to do that in the past? And how do you create change? Again, what are the resources? What is the time needed, the planning, and particularly the collective action? And history also shows us failures, approaches or ways of doing things that didn't work. What I would like to say here that's very important, history can also teach us to overcome prejudice and bias like Islamophobia, which I have to deal with here just about every day. That it's the quiet kind, the negative assumptions made about anyone coming from the Middle East. And of course, issues, as I mentioned before, about globalized education, which actually kills off a lot of cultures, values, languages, and this progressivist fallacy that somehow if you've got a modern Western country, that's what everybody should aspire to because it's actually healthy and right. Well, it's not. One concept I'd like to bring in here is Bourdieu's concept of capital. He regarded the culture, cultural norms, religious knowledge, all that symbolic stuff, the social knowledge that we have as the capital that we use. It gives us the power to create or recreate societies. And Bourdieu got that from spending time in North Africa with the Berber. He started as an anthropologist, and once he spent time with them and began to understand how societies can operate differently and well, that's when he moved in and created a whole new sociology. So that's retained. Different kinds of capital. This is this knowledge, the values, the skills, all of those things which are carried down through history, but at the same time have to be open to change, innovation, and that sort of thing. So we're looking at this region, the lessons that we get. The earliest societies had humanism. They had law codes before Hammurabi. They had social justice concepts and rules about protecting the weak. That goes back to the earliest written records that we have in cities. They also had a much more sophisticated and trained administration. They set up special schools for that more than 5,000 years ago. And that's where the youth would go into these training, these centers for training people to manage the marketplace, have building construction projects and that sort of thing. And the region itself has, I thought the next one, has had many, many rebuildings. There have been frequent, if you go back through the history of different empires and nations, there's a huge repository of how to do that in different ways and preserve the diversity. One thing I'd like to point out is that a lot of Westerners don't actually know where their knowledge comes from. That thing that was called the Renaissance was actually over a few hundred years when all that knowledge that was concentrated into the Middle East and North Africa came pouring into Europe. And it continued after the Renaissance, as I mentioned, with the German Enlightenment particularly. And you can trace back, I was asked to write a book for Public Admin on Ibn Khaldun's contributions to public administration. And it's really interesting. I know Weber very well, that tradition of public admin. And it's like reading an early Weber, just several hundred years earlier. So if you look at the history, because we're looking at what do you need and what is the role of youth and new generations in dealing with crises and disasters in MENA, it's pretty well been everything, including tsunamis. So when certain volcanoes went off, they did set off tsunamis that rushed around around the Mediterranean area. There have been many colonizations, many invasions, rebellions, wars, illnesses and pandemics, and many economic collapses. So there really are a lot of lessons in that to see how this is one of them. I don't know how many of you live near sand dunes, but I think I'd only arrived in Dubai. That was my first time in the Middle East. I flew to Dubai, and within about 2 weeks, I got caught in a sandstorm outside for about half an hour before I could find a refuge. And then I found out what the shayla was for, why men and women have headdress in these areas, because later ones I got caught in, I was wearing an abaya and shayla by then. So, and then you find out you can breathe again. But there are, the expansion of desert and drought and part of the climate change that's been going on. There've been several periods of this. One, for those of you who like to look at a documentary, this one is particularly good. Eric Klein is an archaeologist who specialized in looking at a period of time, this part of the world where there was a huge amount of trade going on. They were all interlinked. And then around the time of, by around 1200, the whole thing was collapsing. And there were several disasters going on at one time. So these were the societies that were there that were quite sophisticated in terms of building economy, manufacture, agriculture, all that sort of thing. And all their economies were interconnected. All of these had an enormous disruption or failure in their societies. It was multiple failures. There were invasions, earthquakes, climate change going on, the disruption of trade for essential goods, because they traded so much that economies were built on what they traded goods. There were rebellions. And what ended up happening for a period of time is that the entire writing system, technology, and even dealing with architecture were disrupted for a period of time. So it's a bit of a microcosm if you want to look at how did the societies in that region rebuild after these multiple disasters that took place. This is the book, and there was collapse in the society in terms of how it managed itself. The leadership class pretty much disappeared. The economy collapsed, settlements shifted. There was a huge population decline, many died. And the collapse, it actually occurred over about a 200-year period, and then finally that last collapse occurred. And it took a long time to rebuild. And the collapse that may occur in one nation is not going to be confined to one nation. It's probably going to cause crises in neighboring, in the region. And the effects on people, this is what they were facing at that time: water, a proper food supply, clean food, electricity in later periods, however, whatever power they were using was gone. The disruption in medical treatment and supplies, and we know that medical treatment goes back a very long way, and some of the supplies that would have come in through trade. Housing was destroyed. The markets were destroyed. All kinds of other things like various social services and education. Travel got disrupted, but you had huge refugee populations and a loss of a lot of the important technologies that had been developing. So and then you have the so-called intangible effects, the trauma, the disruption of family. In this case, I mean more extended family and tribal structures. Religious identity, ethnic and national identities had a huge impact. For example, for many Syrians right now, I've had to counsel people because they're ashamed of being Syrian now, because of what that national identity has come to mean in other ways. The loss of community through which so much gets done. The loss of people's sense of a future and their aspirations. And this is a critical element, because if the youth, the younger generations suffer this, then the rebuilding is going to take a much longer time. And of course, cultural norms and religious practices. So in the beginning, well, we thought for a long time that Mesopotamia, like Sumer, Akkad, the Assyrians, Hittites, Babylonians, those are the early civilizations. Well, now we know, because of some of the archaeological sites in Turkey, that there was something that Göbekli Tepe has now become critically important. That is a site that is incredibly sophisticated. There's some good documentaries that you can find where they do close-ups of the carvings and the knowledge. There's even astronomy recorded in some of these pillars. It was an enormous site, and the engineering knowledge and the tools you would have needed and the planning for something like this. And again, the use of community. So that site's at least 12,000 years old. There are other sites that are speculated to be even earlier, but this is one of the really huge ones that's been discovered. We just don't have any written records at this time. But there is an enormous amount of knowledge and skill and an educational process to carry this forward. So when you're looking at the pre-Islamic period, you're looking at many disruptions and rebuildings that took place, and many of these were highly successful. Again, to just sort of focus in on particularly one city I want to get. So here's another timeline of looking at rebuildings that had to take place after wars, invasions, disruption of societies that would have taken place. And but what we do have from the time of Sumer is that we do have tablets. There's a written record that was beginning. So we know more about this, and we know how people had to respond to it. This is the first city that we know of with written records that go back quite a long way. And what's important is that they were very sophisticated then. They had a complex bureaucracy, they had trade, they had markets, they had huge architecture, they had a religious system, they had science and scholarship beginning. They were even keeping record of waste in their metal production. So you have this an enormous amount of skill, knowledge, and community and social relationships and networks functioning very well. And this is something that's now coming out. There was scholarship then. I just get really tired of all those books that start out the classical history. Scholarship began with the Greco-Roman period. Well, excuse me, it didn't. It began much earlier, and it began in many fields. That means you've got a great deal of innovation going on, a lot of organized educational activity. There, I'm going to pause here, because of course the Islamic world, the Middle East, North African world inherited all of that in a much more active way than most people think. Yeah, Hiba? Your microphone is still off.
Hiba, you can say directly.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm really sorry. I didn't know that it was off. First of all, I want to say, like, I'm really thankful that we have you as a speaker in this rich program. And at the same time, I just was thinking about, you mentioned trauma, and you mentioned how, like, there are so many events that affect us and can create traumatic experiences. And I was thinking about like intergenerational trauma. Like you mentioned colonialism, and I'm thinking that especially I come from Tunisia, so I'm from North Africa, and I think that in a way or another, even if colonialism ended, we still deal with its effects, And
yeah. Sorry. There's several effects. There's several pieces of this actually, because you've got the heritage of the earlier colonization, and then you've got the loss of a lot of identity. Identity gets really damaged in that process. And then on top of that, there's a neo-colonization going on. So for me, for example, in the Gulf, the British colonial period was supposed to have ended by 1970. But everywhere around me, when I got there, I was seeing all of these expats being brought in who felt that the only knowledge worth having is what they brought with them from the UK and the US, that there wasn't any. So, it affects identity, because then you don't know. This has sort of happened for women. The way that you help women expand their capacity and ability is for them to know that there have been many women who came before who created great accomplishments, and that history of that has been removed. The same thing happens to cultural groups and certain societies where they're basically losing touch with that history of identity, values, accomplishment, upon which you base your development. So I tend to do an awful lot of post-colonial critique now, because particularly in the Gulf area where it's quite intense. But that's another form of trauma, is that this feeling that there's nothing in your society and history and nation that has value anymore. That's an enormous trauma, and that affects many generations. Could take a long time to recover and recapture from the, the value from these heritages that are there. And that's sort of what the theme through the next couple sections here is, that in fact there is a great deal that's there. You don't necessarily need to have knowledge being imported from somewhere else to rebuild, because if you look back in the history of the region, there's been a much longer and very successful history in doing that. I don't know if I answered all your questions. There's a bit, some of the themes that you mentioned, they'll be coming up again.
Yes, I feel like maybe I kind of couldn't wait, and I asked about something that you were just about to mention, but I just wanted to just ask a question, and you don't have to answer it now. I'm sure it will, you will be able to answer it in the upcoming slides. Okay. And it is, as you said, like there is just not colonialism, like the trauma that colonialism brought, but also the ongoing events that bring their trauma as well to us. But I want to ask you, usually when you talk about trauma, you always get to heal, like start healing the person when the trauma ends. But what to do when you feel that you're still continuously being traumatized?
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah, because you're getting layers of it. You've got, one of the problems in the Middle East and North Africa is you've got layers of it, and you've got several of them going on at once. Now, I think there are things that can be done that at least start to reverse some of those trends. And part of what I'm looking at today is what some of those pieces are. And the healing, because it's psychological, it's social trauma, it's all sorts of levels of trauma. And at some point, unless you can start to rebuild an identity and the values that go into that identity, I don't know that you can build much on top of that. So even if you have new traumas coming, because there's been sort of one layer after another, and some of them are slow traumas and others are like a very intense event. I think the beginning of it has to be addressing the identity part of it. And that's what you do in many trauma recoveries, is that you have to go back and rebuild your identity. I see this colonizing through education as really pernicious, because that prevents drawing on those really valuable parts of your own history and traditions that give you part of that identity. Anyway, I'll move on a bit because it is going to come up again. So the Rashidun period, this is one of my favorite movies, this one, excuse me. Because of course there was the trauma of having to flee from Mecca. There were killings, there were people being hunted down. And of course, there were military actions. There were quite a few different strategies and events taking place. But what you have is the building of Medina and that new society that's referred to as the Rashidun period. So you have the period of the Prophet Muhammad and his wives. People forget there were several women companions. Some of them actually went into government in Medina and managed the marketplace, the economy, politics, medicine, all those sorts of things. And one of my favorites, Khadija, really, when I gave a management talk before, I was using her as a role model. So that's part of it. When you go back, how are you going to touch base with the role models in your own traditions that give you that? But what you get in this rebuilding period with the Quran and the Sunnah and then the Hadith that were developed is that you have sources of strength and knowledge that come, that you can categorize them sort of in these: the character, personality that people should have, the knowledge and skills that they need to have, the kinds of social, political, and moral values that need to be constructed and used in society. And then the end values and goals, or what Max Weber called substantive values, the ones that you're aiming for. Now, excuse me, I'm just going to show one of these. character and personality, because in Islam, at the core of Islam, are a very specific understanding of the qualities of character and personality that you should be cultivating and developing. And if you look at Islam as a highly pragmatic religion, there's no accident that these are qualities that have to do with social action, helping rebuild your society, the capacities, rebuilding the economic and social sectors and the communities, and how you create a society that has social justice embedded in it, and the kind of qualities you need as individuals and also as groups. So that is something that became shaped at that time and became a resource, if you look at it that way. Also, there is a particular style of leadership that began to form as well. The aims that you should have, regardless of, excuse me, what kind of social sector you're in, there's certain fundamental aims that you should have. And you're there as not just the servant of people. If you're in a leadership role, you're there to provide protection. And one of the things I love in some of the Quranic and Sunnah writings is how you're supposed to treat people. Oh, excuse me. I've got a sore throat. What I find interesting, it's not just a list of the things that you're supposed to do. There's a very specific list of things you don't do to other people in an organization or in a community. You don't stab them in the back. You don't spread gossip about them, all those sort of the slandering and those sorts of things. So if I move to the next one, is a model of ethics for leadership. This is the essential sort of underlying Islamic model. And you can see the two sides that it has. I hope I can be able to continue. So what you have is a cultural, this goes back to Bordeaux. You've got cultural capital here. You've got moral capital here. You've got symbolic values. You've got these things, because ultimately social action in a community or society is going to be built on top of those things. If they don't have these things, you have exploitation, disarray, crisis. Here, Khadija. Yeah, I find her particularly important as a role model. And this was part of what I was doing in a management conference for Muslim women's empowerment, is that if you go back into the tradition, it's all there. You don't need to create it now. You need to recreate it, to give it life now. But the role models are there. Now, if we move into another period of great rebuilding with the Abbasid Empire, the huge amount of rebuilding that had to take place, an extremely successful rebuilding, and in a very short period of time, you have an enormous body of scholars, knowledge, technologies. This is where this is where the West got a lot of its stuff from. And of course, what was important there too was not just rebuilding locally, but also absorbing knowledge coming in from India, China, and other places. This movie, excuse me, is very important because it shows the medical and hospital facilities that were there at this time before they ever showed up anywhere in Europe. The West didn't have it, and the West had to borrow it. So also the first university, the first degree granting university was in Fez. This is where Europe got its universities from. You know, it's just amazing when I watch Western expats go into other parts of the world, assuming that they're the ones with knowledge and they're the model everyone should follow. Well, no, not necessarily. So this was, this is critically important. And then you have, of course, springing up many other universities in the region. And then if you read Makdizi's work, how that influenced then the rise of universities through Europe and other places. The expansion of Islam occurred very quickly. What is interesting about many of the empires in this part of the world is the tolerance that was exhibited and the absorption of people's skills and knowledge and abilities. But it happened very rapidly. Of course, there were, I mean, you're still dealing with wars and invasions and that sort of thing. But what you do get, though, is the construction of a society and an administration, market, schools, technology, water supply treatment, all sorts of technologies that were formed. This is just another one to get, kind of the scope is quite large. And what's so critically important here was the intellectual centers that were created, because this is where innovation came from. Again, a very strong administration, bringing in people from other religious backgrounds and other cultures, and the emphasis that was placed on education, huge construction of education. So that, I mean, part of the emphasis here that made them so powerful, I think, was how much investment was made in the youth and giving opportunities for the next generations to acquire the experience and education to then carry their leadership forward. The intellectual capital, the mirrors of princes. There are many of these, and these are basically texts for the youth. How to be a good leader, how to lead in your community, in your tribe, in your society, in organizations that you might be part of. There's an enormous literature here. And it's interesting to compare this with a lot of the business management literature now. These actually have much more important moral values at their core, and social and community values and rebuilding values. And there was this explosion that took place. And this, of course, is what was migrated into Europe. And the Arabian Nights, you have a lot, no, it's philosophy, literature, and science, technology, medicine, engineering, all of this. There's a very interesting documentary and books that have come out on what's called the 1001 Inventions. Just to give you a bit of a list. I put coffee in because coffee is very important to me personally, but surgery, I mean, even a flying machine, algebra, optics, all of these things, even the toothbrush. There's a lovely description of Saladin and his on his horse with his senior officers on their horses, and they're looking across a pasture where the crusaders who've come in from Europe are. So think of Saladin. He washes 5 times a day. His clothes are washed regularly. He has a toothbrush. He has a fork to use. And they're looking at a group of people on the other side of that land who never wash and change their clothing once a year. And I find that kind of a rather interesting opposition that some historians point to show the difference. So I'll pause here again before we launch into some modern period. Ooh, I'm going to have to move quickly because my time's almost out. I can take one urgent question, or I could just kind of finish.
I can't see any question, I think.
I'll just continue on then. Actually, some of the movies that I'm showing here, when I got to Dubai, my doctoral students took me in hand. They took me where I needed to go and shop. And I already knew how to bargain, but it's a slightly different style. And they started telling me about the movies I needed to watch, even though it's Anthony Quinn and that sort of thing. But this is a very interesting piece of history where you have leadership emerging out of a community when it was needed. So in looking at them now, see that this in the modern period, Here's my post-colonial. Yeah, I don't like this stuff. And if you go abroad, you go to a Western country to go to university, it's probably not too likely that they're going to give you, have you including knowledge about your own country. This is an Australian cartoon. Yeah, this. I went to a conference once, an international conference for ed leadership and admin, and they were talking about, you know, the knowledge that we have to share with the world. So I showed a room full of people this photograph, and this was a few years ago. So it was around the time that Homs was being badly bombed. And I said, do you have anything, any knowledge or skills valuable for the principal of this school right now? Is there anything in our field that's been developed to address any of this? Well, of course, they had absolutely nothing. I was very angry about it because of what was happening in a lot of international conference who were moaning about how terrible things are in the world, but then they didn't want to research and develop anything that was going to be useful. I've taken the number of people who have dealt with sort of crises in societies and what happens to them. Jared Diamond's done a fair amount of work internationally in this area, looking at when it is that you have a crisis in your society. I think for a lot of countries in the Middle East and North Africa, you know that there's crisis happening. Sometimes it may not be apparent how early the crisis is starting, which is part of one of his points in looking at the inventory of trying to determine if you need to change what's happening in your society. Stage one, anticipating a problem that is coming up. And people want to ignore that there may be a crisis brewing and beginning to happen. Now, what happens in a lot of societies when the crisis is just sort of becoming apparent, it's often the youth, it's younger generations who are noticing that there's something not quite right. Because as you get into later generations, you have rationalization, you sort of cling to what you've been used to for several decades. But often it's the youth, in fact, who are trying to let people know that there's something that's coming, something that's changing or happening. There's going to be a huge problem. The second step, and this is where you kind of do an inventory in terms of whether the nature of the problem and what can be done in a society, is when the really visible part is starting to happen. Are people, and especially leaders in the society, willing to acknowledge that a crisis is happening? Are they willing to accept responsibility for dealing with it, or are they blaming others for it? And I think a very key element at this point as well, when you look at what is happening in the politics of societies going into crisis, is whether or not they're willing to take advice from the community and groups like the youth groups in understanding things that need to be changed. The third stage is actually preparing yourself and doing something about it. What needs to be changed? This involves changes in policy, organizations, and their practices. It may involve negotiating with other nearby nations. It may involve looking at another nation that has gone through something similar recently to look to see if there are any lessons that could have been learned or modifications made. And one key element here, if it really is a crisis in a society, is that you have to harness the community groups. If you've got a traditional society organized in tribes, you're going to have to harness those because those are communities. But this is where the youth particularly play key roles in mobilizing those resources. And again, here a list of the kinds of things, particularly where the youth end up taking critical roles. Back to the question I had earlier, how do you salvage and maintain national identity? That important part of your sense of who makes you what you are and gives you the strength and the will to move on as a resource. And and really determining what is working and what isn't. And again, it's effective, strong, and supported leadership, but not just at the top. It's going to have to come throughout society, through the many different parts of society and levels and communities and neighborhoods, through religious organization, through all of those sectors. And then what do you do if it's failing? How do you solve it? How do you, if the solutions have failed, how do you rebound from that and fix that? And again, key resources youth can bring that keep showing up in this long, long history is collective commitment, vision, a new vision, because that's part of innovation, and often the youth are the ones who can produce that, not the people who've been in the system for a very long time. And also the value system to support it, innovative knowledge and skills, innovative ways of organizing and setting reforms into motion and carrying them out. And also it's the one other thought I had here. I've sort of talked about a lot of these. This is another networking. Okay, the younger generations tend to take better to new technologies, and a way that networking is done pretty globally now. I was just looking at a lot of security alerts about what's happening with ransomware and hacking and all that sort of thing. One of the ways to combat that is actually to have counter networking going on. But it's going to be younger generations who really understand how to use that in a very effective way, and the kind of innovations that are brought to that. And I wanted to end on a positive note. Cordova, Al-Andalus, the source of another source of the European Renaissance. So that's where I'll stop. And we've got 4 minutes. Sorry.
Thank you so much for such an informative session. I really, really enjoyed it. I wanted to kind of relate it to the project we're doing.
Yeah.
So we're focused, my team and I are focused on gender equality and the violence in Muslim communities.
Yeah.
So in relation to what you've been sharing with us, I'm thinking into how you've mentioned identity and how it's kind of rebuilding the identity and adding value to the individual members of, essentially in this case, the women.
Yeah.
So I wondered if you've done if you've come across during your time any work around that in terms of rebuilding women as a way of tackling gender-based violence in Muslim communities.
There's a part of it I did on Saturday. Because the European Academy of Management, I don't know why, because I'm not really in business management. They asked me to give a PowerPoint, a presentation on Muslim women's empowerment. I can send that. You can look at it. I think there's some elements in there. I think there are several things going on though. On one hand, and I think this is connected to the decline, the loss of culture and values and religion and all of that, the kind of disruption going on when a foreign kind of modernization is being forced on a lot of countries. There's something called multiple modernities. You don't have to modernize the way other countries do. You can create your own where you maintain those values and patterns of behavior and cultural norms. And that's where often the violence is coming in, because you've got some of those processes at play, as well as external factors that are coming in. And then another piece of that is then what do the women draw on to build their own empowerment? So maybe I should send that PowerPoint in as well on Muslim women's empowerment, because I was looking at the different kinds of psychological, moral, social, cultural resources that women have in the Middle East and North Africa that come out of the Islamic tradition. And it's so opposite to this Islamophobia I'm having to swim around in here right now. But so that's a piece of it. I think it's that kind of a problem, you're looking at several factors. You're looking at local factors, external factors. You've got cultural and moral factors. You've got disintegration of family. This is one thing Western countries, they've lost. They've become very individualistically, narcissistically oriented. They've taken the nuclear family to the point where it doesn't really function anymore. I just am so happy. I became adopted into the Gulf, and I live, my families are mostly Emirati. And I was able to rediscover the extended family and the tribe and what that can give you. Now, there's one very lucky place. It's going through a great deal of technologization, and but many of the families have not lost those important cultural, social, and moral, religious values that keep their families healthy and those communities functioning well. While they and it's one place where women are moving into very powerful positions, lots of them. So the capacity for that can be found in the region. I don't think don't need to look outside of it, which is what some NGOs will tell you. They would think they're going to need to import something from the US or the UK or Australia. You don't need to do that. But I think that's a symptom of the decline of cultures. It's an area I'm working on cultural security. I think it's culture that needs to be securitized so that we can recognize it and save those cultures.
Thank you so much.
Did I answer your question?
Yeah, no, you've done it perfectly, because I was avoiding Orientalism as an approach as well, because you know how, yeah, I was avoiding it. So you've answered it perfectly. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I have an advantage though when I do this, because I was raised in very diverse parts of Canada, and I studied and worked with friends and profs from many countries and religions, and I taught the same. And then I found out about 10 years ago, because my background is mostly French and German. That's why I knew a lot about the German Enlightenment and the role of Islam in that. But I found out 10 years ago that the French family originated in Syria. And then I discovered I do actually have roots in the region. So that actually, it's hard to explain what that meant to me. It sort of filled a gap. I always felt there was something missing, and that piece just kind of came into play.
Another question, guys?
I might have tried to cover too much too fast.
Actually, I have a question.
Yeah.
Doctor, my question about cultural transformation in Arabic Islamic world, and you know that we were the masters of the wisdom of humanity, especially at the Caliph al-Rashid's and Caliph al-Ma'mun's periods in the Golden Age.
Oh yeah.
But someday this status changed to east to west. I just wondering what's the reason of this transformation, and I really wondering your perspective about that.
I'm not sure that I quite understood what you meant. Is it the same thing as, I don't use the term Persian Gulf, I use the term Arabian Gulf.
Actually, I mean, and every person said the Western community started from the Renaissance, but we know that it's not true. But I guess we left something in our community as Arabic Islamic community, and after then this status, this wisdom of humanity left to another civilization after collapsed our civilization.
Yeah, that's really the rise of the West.
Yeah.
And then colonizing, because what you get with the rise of the West is then this enormous colonization that was happening over quite a long period of time from many Western countries. And that's where you get this, you know, the post-colonial, the subaltern, the colonization of mind, all of those sorts of things. And then of course, colonizers, they want to maintain control. And one way you maintain control is that you say, you disturb the local culture and its knowledge and education, and you replace it with your own, because ultimately you have to colonize the minds and identities of the people who were there, right? And that's been a persistent thing for quite a long period of time, and it's still going on. It's still, so then you get the redefinition of everything. Now, during the Renaissance, early Renaissance period, what's interesting, I find, is that there were quite a few migrant scholars. So you had scholars from Europe going into Cairo, Baghdad, and various places to study for a few years. Then they would go back to Europe, taking medicine or whatever it was with them. So if you're reading those early ones, or some of the Enlightenment scholars who are saying, yes, we have to use Ibn Rushd and Ibn Sina, Al-Farabi to build our German Enlightenment on top of. It was particularly preserved in the German tradition. But you see, the Germans were tribes. I think that's something, you know, the Germans, I come from a particular German tribe in my German heritage. So, but that got lost, and then that got lost through the industrialization, the colonization period. So they're even rewriting their own history, not just the histories of the colonies that they take over, but they rewrite their own histories at home. And I remember when I first arrived in the Gulf, Suleiman, he said, why did you come from Canada? And, you know, you got your house there and everything. I said, no, I don't. I packed everything and I moved. And he said, well, how could you do that? I said, because I had a good feeling about this. So literally everything's on a boat, a ship arriving, and there isn't anything left in Canada. And he said, well, why would you do that? Why would you come? I said, because this is where civilization began. This is where the history of it is, because I studied ancient history. So for me, that was like, it was like the Mecca for me to come to the Gulf for that reason. And then they said, well, what about, so they got into this issue of the politics of knowledge. And I said, well, if you do intellectual history, if you're trained in intellectual history, from that perspective, the West is a child of Islam as well, whether it wants to admit it or not. Now, unfortunately, they took a lot of stuff and then they twisted it around. You know, there's, but the more I dig and the more I look, and there are a lot, and the other thing that I find when because I do a lot of peer review for journals, especially for Middle East articles. And what I find with a lot of Westerners, they'll say, oh, well, I had to collect my data, but there's nothing on English in this, and, you know, nothing on Saudi schools or whatever. So, you know, oh man, I massacre those people. There is a huge body of literature. When I first arrived, I was told there's nothing in English published in any books. And I thought, are you crazy? You know, so because all you had to do was go on Amazon and there are like 10,000 books in English, you know. So you see, that's just not normal ignorance. That's actually resistance. And I think it has to do with trying to maintain a very fractured, imperfect superiority. So you're threatened. I mean, this gets into the psychology of this, is that if your superiority isn't really very healthy, anything else is a threat. So you got to stamp out all that other stuff.
Great.
So that's sort of, that's what I've sort of gleaned from my experiences.
Yeah, I've got so many inspirations from you. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I couldn't really see many faces, so I wasn't sure how this was going over. But maybe what I should do, write me an email. I'll send you that Muslim Women's Empowerment PowerPoint, because it's being turned into an article over the holidays. But especially for women, for young women, I think there's some bits in there that could be very, very important.
Thank you so much. And after then, we will share your presentation to all participants in our Slack channel.
Okay, thank you very much. Evren, I see you back again.
Thank you so much, Eugenie. Okay. This was really fantastic as usual.
Thank you.
And hopefully next time we'll be hosting you once again in Doha. Last time it was really great when we hosted you.
By the way, can I make a request to everybody? I'm going to be working on a book on the use of film and really, really good TV series for a lot of this stuff. So if you know that there's a fantastic film that covers something, just email me, let me know, because I'm collecting. I've got a library now of Middle East and North African film, but I want to include a lot of that material as well.
So Rima is asking what genre of... What strand of movies that you are?
Oh, I'm looking at actually films that have anything to do with social and cultural change, certainly leadership, management. So a lot of the films on the various empires, caliphs, that sort of thing, and especially coming up through the, cover historical periods and come into the modern day. So a lot of it really has to do with a lot, the cultural values, the social, how those changes are happening, some of the crises that are going on. And then I want to be able to pull from that this sort of cluster of what values, identity, and leadership, and that sort of, and empowerment stuff. And there's a huge amount out there. Some of it, I don't know how good some of it is. So certainly recommendations would be very much welcomed.
One of the participants, Hiba, actually just mentioned that she's a film student, film study student.
Cool.
So maybe she can help you with, she's from Morocco, and
yeah, she can email me.
Make contact.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you so much, Eugenie, Professor Samier. We were honored, and we look forward to having you in Ramadan program as well, inshallah.
And hopefully see you in person in not too long,
True.
Okay.
Take care. Cheers.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
So there, Sister Iman, are you with us for the next presentation?
Yes,
Yay.
I am. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Hi, I hope you're all doing well. Can you guys hear me okay? Just audio check.
Great.
Okay, good.
And
so I'll
right now also. Can share your screen.
Okay.
Guys, we have a special opportunity for everyone, and
big opportunity.
Yeah, dear Iman will explain what is that, and stage is yours, dear Iman.
Thank you very much. All right, so I'll start with a quick introduction. My name is Iman Abdabaghi Ismail. I'm a third-year student. I forgot for a bit. I'm a third-year student at Georgetown University in Qatar. I'm studying culture and politics with a double minor in economics and Arabic. I'm also the president of the Sustainability Club at Georgetown, which is how all of this came about. So for the Sustainability Club, we were running a parliamentary debate online, on Zoom, of course, at the time of Qatar Sustainability Week, which was at the beginning of November. And I decided, we want to make as many activities as possible, so let's try an online debate. Unfortunately, the semester was just too hectic, so it ended up being a discussion, but it's okay. We were super excited for it anyway. And then Dr. Evan reached out to me, and he asked would I be willing to do a presentation for this for the Designing Post-COVID Humanity group, which is incredible. I've seen some of the work you guys have been doing, the sessions you've had. Just listening to Dr. Eugenie's presentation just now was absolutely insightful. I'm actually writing my essay on Middle Eastern history, so that was, provided some great insight. So I'm really excited to be here and honored that I get to give you guys this presentation. I definitely don't feel qualified enough, but hopefully you'll forgive me. So before I continue, I just wanted to let you guys know that if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, or you can try to unmute yourself. I might not be able to see you until the end of the presentation. But if you want to just jump in and ask a question right away, please feel free to do that. Or if you would prefer to ask your question afterwards, feel free to do that as well. I don't want to keep you guys for too long, so I'll try to make this as quick as possible. But on that note, I do tend to talk really quickly. So if I'm talking too fast, let me know. All right, so let's get started. So who here, if you can, give me a thumbs up reaction or raise your hand even, who here is familiar with parliamentary debate? I'll open up the participants list so I can see. Okay, so Rima's not. Don't worry, until 2 years ago, I wasn't either. So it's kind of funny that I'm teaching you guys this now when I'm not that familiar with it. Okay, so Muhammad is. That's good. So it's good to know that there are people. So Muhammad, if I make any mistakes, please correct me. I'm not perfect in any sense, you know. And then Hajar. Okay, good. So we've got, you know, 2 people at least who are familiar with parliamentary debate. But essentially, before I go on, actually, I have a really cool picture. What do you notice in this picture? What's interesting about it besides the 2 people holding it up? And if you know who the picture is by, even better. Drop it in the chat. Simios. Opposite teams. Okay. Okay, chimpanzees. Yes. Good job, CP. So yeah, so it's a painting by Banksy. If you don't know him, I definitely recommend you look him up. He is an incredible artist. He's basically very anonymous. I believe most of his work is based in France. Again, correct me if I'm wrong. So this was his parliamentary of chimpanzees. It was basically like political commentary on how ineffective the parliamentary tends to be. Fortunately, we're not, you know, we're not doing a political debate. It's really just a debate for fun, super casual. You know, there's not going to be any strict voting or anything, but it does tell you about the state of politics generally. This painting was made years ago, so it's interesting to see that in many ways, you know, the metaphor still stands, especially in American politics, just saying. Yeah, exactly. So we're definitely still at this level of humanity. But anyways, that was just, you know, a fun way to get started. So I'm going to start with the debate logistics to get into some of the more formalities. Asking you guys, how do you approach a debate motion? Also, how do you establish a debate motion? So to give you a rundown for those who are not familiar with parliamentary debate, it's used formally in many countries by the United Kingdom, Singapore, Denmark, Japan, Malaysia, Australia, Germany, and so many other countries as well. So any country that is considered a parliamentary democracy are countries that use a parliamentary debate style. That's how they get a lot of their motions passed. So if they're saying we have to have more funding for public education, because the debate they would bring to the parliamentary court. And then essentially at the most basic structure, parliamentary debates are divided between the government and the opposition, clearly. Government is referred to as the House, opposition is referred to as opposition. It's also extemporaneous style. I didn't know this word until I was in high school, but it's essentially, if you might be more familiar with the word impromptu, which means you'll have very little time to prepare, and instead you'll have to sit there and prepare on the spot. So I'll go through the timetable as well, but in an extemporary style parliamentary debate, you'll have 15 minutes to prepare. Don't worry, that's actually plenty of time when you see the motion. You also have to discuss the issues in a respectful manner. That is key to parliamentary debate. If you look at some parliamentary videos, like I know that there's a lot that I've seen in recent cases where parliamentary debates became super chaotic. That does tend to happen, but you know, you're not politicians. I'm sure you can all be better than politicians. You could all be a lot more respectful. That's coming from a student who's actually studying politics. So, you know, it's kind of interesting that I'm turning against my possible future occupation, but we'll see how it goes. And essentially both sides are trying to convince the judge or judges to vote in their favor. I know I covered up the word favor with a gavel, just know that that's what it says. So that's a rundown of parliamentary debate. And in terms of debate timetable, if anyone wants to calculate these and let me know the total time, I have calculated it, but you know, feel free to do an extra calculation just for fun. I don't know. So this is, I am tweaking parliamentary debate a little bit to make it a little easier for you guys. But basically, we'll start with 5 minutes where the judge and will introduce the debate motion to the table, meaning they'll introduce it to the rest of the audience, as well as especially the debaters themselves. So a motion, to explain sort of the lingo that I'll be using, a motion is the debate topic. And it's usually phrased, or actually always phrased in the sense, this house believes, or this house should, you know, something like that. Typically this house believes because it's saying what the government believes and what the opposition is going to fight against. Also, to clarify that term, when I say government, I don't mean the entirety of the government, but rather those who are representing the house. And then you have the opposition teams. And then after the motion is presented in 15 minutes, the teams will have time to prepare. Thank you, Gossel. Total of 75 minutes. So the teams will have time to prepare in their own Zoom breakout rooms. Since this is extemporaneous style, I'm taking it a step further. You won't know your teams until you get to the Zoom room. Again, don't be scared. It's nothing to be scared about. Yes, Mohammed, exactly. Thinking on the spot is what extemporaneous means. So you'll have 15 minutes to prepare, and then we'll jump right into the speeches once everyone returns. So the judge themselves will be the one leading you guys through this. So whoever's debating, you'll just have to listen out to what the judge is saying to know when you're speaking. So you'll start with 7 minutes. That's called the government constructive, which is the opening speech of the prime minister. The prime minister is referred to as the government head. But just because they're called the prime minister doesn't mean they're more special than anyone. It just means they're the ones opening up the speech. And then the following 8 minutes will be the opposition constructive, which is the opening speech of the opposition. So in the government constructive and the opposition constructive, they're not quite fighting against each other just yet. They're establishing their main points. The government constructive is saying, we believe this, this, and this, because of this, this, and this. And then the opposition is saying, well, we believe this, this, and this. This is why you should deny the motion. And then the 8 minutes will, then the government will have another 8 minutes. Now the second member of the government team will come on. They'll have 8 minutes to respond to what the opposition has said and to reestablish their own points. They can also bring in new arguments. This is important. They can only bring in new arguments in this speech. No other place are they allowed to bring in new arguments. So first in the 7 minutes constructive speech, and then again in the response speech. In the rebuttal, no new arguments can be presented. That will make you lose points. And then the following 8 minutes will be the opposition's constructive. But the second member of the opposition team will come and will respond to the government's points, as well as reassert their arguments, present any new arguments that they believe are necessary to help them win. And then the following 4 minutes will be an opposition rebuttal, where the opposition team. So I know this is actually not a mistake. The opposition will come back after the opposition. So that'll be the opposition so the second member of the team, and then the third member of the team. I know it says member 2. That's just because I'm not counting opposition leader. And let me see. There's a question. Okay, I'll get back to the questions in a bit. Let me just finish running through the table. And then after the 4 minutes of the opposition's rebuttal, where they restate why they believe that they should win, again, no new arguments, then the government will start their rebuttal as well for 5 minutes, where they respond to the opposition's rebuttal, not bringing in new arguments, simply restating. So think of rebuttals as conclusion, right? When you're writing a conclusion of an essay, one of the key rules is to never bring in more information. You're just supposed to bring in and repeat information that you said before. That's all it is. It's just a summary. And in 15 minutes, this is the judge's decision. So you guys will probably be doing something else. Maybe you'll jump off Zoom for a bit, take a little 15-minute break, and the judge or judges will come and present their final decision over which team has won. I'll get into the position of the judges in a bit as well, but let me just see some of these questions. Okay, so we need 2 breakout rooms, right, as opposition and government? Yeah, so you guys will definitely not be in the same room. I would defeat the purpose. But basically opposition will go into one room, one Zoom room. They'll also have, they might have a guide there depending on how many debates we end up running. So the opposition will go into one room, and then the government will go into one room, Zoom breakout room, of course. And then they will discuss and have the 15 minutes to prepare. A key point here, you will not be allowed to go back into your breakout rooms after the 15-minute preparation session, but I do highly recommend that either you use Slack to have a group discussion or you privately chat with your group members. Whatever works best for you, because you are clearly allowed to have discussions. If we were running this in person, you would be able to talk amongst yourselves even during the speech, as long as you're being respectful of the speaker. You want to listen, but you also want to make sure you guys are going through your points as well. The topics being debated, what are they usually about? And just like Fatima answered, it is usually about issues on development proposals and whatnot. As you'll see, our discussion, because this is the DPCH, of course, it'll be about the post-COVID world. Again, Mohammed has provided some answers, so thank you very much for that. Let me see how far outside the political realm the debates can go. Very far outside. It depends on the topic as well. Like you could have a discussion where it's completely not related to politics, but almost everything is tied into politics, so you usually end up bringing it up anyway. When it's a political debate, that's different. That's only centered on political questions of politics, right? But in this, it's meant to be very casual and informal, as most of you are not aware of how parliamentary debates work. So I don't want anyone to be stressed out by sort of how this works. Okay, so here's some of the debate points. And by debate points, what I mean are some of the points that you as a participant can raise. And so the first point is point of order. So the point of order can be raised anytime. So it doesn't matter who is speaking. And it's when there's a violation of a rule by one of the speakers. So if I'll give you guys a scenario. Say I'm on the podium, right? And I decide to introduce a new argument in my rebuttal. Say I'm the head of government. Then maybe Dr. Everett, who is leading, maybe he's leading opposition. He will stand up or in Zoom, raise his hand and say point of order to the judge or to the chair. And in this point of order, he would say, once the judge recognizes him, you have to wait for the judge to recognize you, don't speak out of turn. Then he will say point of order. The opposition believes that the government has not followed the rules and is introducing a new argument in their rebuttal. Then the judge will take that into account and the government will be allowed to continue speaking. They won't stop their speech. They'll only take a minor break to hear the point of order. And then the point of personal privilege also can be raised at any time. So that's when, say again, I'm government and I'm the one on the podium. And I say that the opposition team, I'm like, you know what? They're really badly dressed today. They don't even look like they're prepared. You know, they're just bad speakers. I'm not attacking their arguments. I'm attacking them as people, and that's very wrong. Like that's very bad to do in a parliamentary debate because it shows informality and it shows a lack of professionalism. So the opposition team can stand up, say point to personal privilege. The opposition is being disrespected and is being offended, and their arguments are not being addressed, but rather their personal characteristics are, something like that. And then the judge will take that down as well. And then the point of information is different from point of order, point of personal privilege. It's when you ask a question or clarify an issue. So say I'm government again, and I say, maybe I misquote, sorry, not misquote. Maybe I've said something about, I've used a big word in my argument, right? Maybe I've been like, it's an amalgamation of different points. And then the opposition is like, wait, why is she using this big word? Like that doesn't make sense. And the opposition can raise a point of information to the judge, and the judge will recognize them. And they can, and then the opposition can say, can the speaker please clarify what amalgamation means? And then I as a government would say amalgamation means a mixture of, right? It's just a combination of. And then the opposition would have their answer and I can continue with my speech. It doesn't only have to be clarifying questions, it can also just be a simple question. Like maybe the opposition says, maybe my argument is that I believe all animals should be allowed to roam free. And then the opposition is like, do you believe wild animals should be allowed to roam free as well? After they've raised a point of information, then I will address that. And I will say, yes, even wild animals should be allowed to roam free, not only domesticated animals. That's just an example. Clearly, we wouldn't be discussing that in this kind of debate. So those are the debate points. Don't worry about this again. You guys will be provided with this presentation. So if you have any more questions after this, feel free to let me know. And prior to the debate, I can also send out additional resources so that the debaters feel more prepared. So this is just meant to be a quick presentation, and I've already taken too much time. And I think I didn't clarify this. Actually, let me go back. There's also only three members on each team. Typically, it's usually two, sometimes even fewer. But for the sake of this debate, I've expanded it just a little bit to allow for room to be 3 speakers. So the prime minister is 1 member. The government member 1 is the 2nd member of the government team, and the government member 2 is a 3rd member of the government team. Then for the opposition team, opposition leader, then you have opposition member 1 and opposition member 2. So 6 total participants, 3 on each team. So depending on how many of you guys decide to volunteer and run the debate, which I'm hoping like a lot of you will, so we'll see. And then we'll run multiple amounts of debates depending on time as well. So here's some of the rules of debate. I already went over these. Do be respectful, always be confident as well. Don't be boastful, but show like I understand my points, I'm confident in my points, and I'm ready to present them to you. Speak in turn. So if you want to raise a point of information, don't unmute your mic and say point of information. So do you mean this? You have to wait to be recognized by the judge. Especially in the Zoom world, we don't want anyone talking over each other. And communicate with your team members, which is what I said earlier. If you want to start a private chat in Slack where you guys can message to make sure you're ready to present your next speech, or just private chat them on Zoom, that's fine. As long as you're being respectful and you're not saying anything that's rude, and also only use that chat for what's essential. Don't just be making jokes, because you want to still be listening to what the other team is saying. Yeah, so I'm going to get to that very soon on how you guys will get involved. This is actually going to be a DPCH session. So if you want to be a debater, then you'll volunteer later on for that session later on, which I'm thinking might be in December. We'll figure out the date soon. And here are the don'ts. Do not exceed the time limit. So if you're given 7-8 minutes, the judge or someone next to the judge will be keeping time, and the judge will have to jump in and say, please come to your concluding points. And then if you run too much over time, you will be cut off. Don't argue with the judges or debaters out of turn. So if you're like, you guys, this is actually crazy, don't just jump in and say, this is like, you're all doing this wrong. Right? You have to be respectful again. That's what being respectful is about. And do not introduce new arguments in the rebuttal. Remember, in a summary, you never introduce new points. You just summarize what you've said before. Yeah, so those are some of the basic rules of debate. Now for debate judging. How is a parliamentary debate judged? A really exciting point here, but I'll get to it soon enough. The judges must be neutral. So if I have a debate on animal rights, and say like maybe the question is more funding should be given to animal orphanages. And I'm like, yeah, I love animals. I'm totally gonna go for whatever the House says because the House is for giving more funding to animals. I can't do that. I have to be neutral. Listen to both sides of the debate and then decide who is better, who is presenting me with better arguments. Because it just might be that the opposition is actually giving me better arguments for why we shouldn't fund animals or fund animal orphanages. Maybe they'll say, well, actually we should be funding animal sanctuaries, which are different from orphanages, right? So if they have better arguments, I have to listen to that and I have to be neutral. This is only if I'm a judge, of course. And as well, the judge has to decide on 4 main attributes. So the respect and poise of the different speakers, the speaking and rhetorical skills. Obviously, I don't have those myself as I'm stumbling over my words, but the speaking and rhetorical skills of both sides of the debate, the quality of the argumentation. So how strong are the arguments? How good are they at bringing them across? Maybe you'll have a strong argument, but you just can't say it correctly. Like that's important too. It's not just, it's not about your level of English. It's about how good are you at telling me that you have a point. And trust me, simplicity is always the best tool here. Because if you can make everyone understand why your argument is the best with the use of simple words, then you're leading yourself towards victory. As well as the ability to follow rules. And that also means, not introducing new points in the rebuttal and things and things like that. So the judge will score from 18 to 30 for each speaker and then tally up the total to see which side of the debate has won. So debates are actually first tallied according to each speaker, not according to the whole team. So it's, it's important for the speakers to be strong, but also for the team to uphold each other. So you want to make sure you're being respectful within your teams as well, and be team players. And lastly, which is the point I'm most excited about, that you guys will be the judges. Not the debaters, of course, but everyone else who isn't a debater. So you guys, besides the 6 who are participating in the debate at the time, will actually be given a form at the end of the debate. We'll be asked to score the speakers according to how you think they filled in these different steps, different characteristics, and then we'll tally them up and decide which side has won. So an important point here, you will also be given a scoring sheet. It won't look like this, but this is basically the key points. I'll leave you guys to look at this later on since the presentation will be shared with you. But basically 18 is like the minimum score for showing up. So if the debater comes, even if they don't speak, even if they say like, hello, I am the government opposition, I'm the government number 1, and then end their speech there, you still get an 18. Never ever will a judge score you 1 to 15. That's just too low. I don't even know why 1 to 15 is, exists, but for formality's sake, it does. Sorry, not 1 to 15, 1 to 17 actually. Those numbers are completely useless. You will never be scored according to that. If you are, then clearly the judge does not know what they're doing. And then up to 30 is the best speech of the century, reserved for Socrates and Martin Luther King Jr. So, and Malcolm X, I'll put that in there. So typically, you won't be awarded a 30 unless you live up to Socrates and Martin Luther King. The highest score that most debaters are typically given might go up to 28. 29 and 30, you have to justify that to those who are running the debate outside. But we don't have to worry about that considering, the Zoomer world that we're in as well. And now for the part where you guys get involved. I've given you a rundown of what parliamentary debate is, but now how do you guys as the DPCH team actually get involved in this yourselves? So you will have an opportunity to join the DPCH debate. Like I said, There's only 6 debaters per session, but don't worry, because we'll run as many sessions as is necessary. I will be here the entirety of my winter break, so I'm not doing anything else. So I'm down to run as many debates as necessary. So everyone who's interested will sign up. And depending on how many sign up as well, we can adjust the times as necessary. So it doesn't have to be a 75-minute debate, because that is quite lengthy. Again, like I said, it's super casual, so I highly encourage as many of you as possible to join. And then here are the steps, as you can see on the fake computer screen. So you'll tag Oksana and Dr. Evren on the Slack team channel, so just in the hashtag general page. And then once you've tagged them and said, I want to join the debate, then you will join the Slack channel for the parliamentary debate. Dr. Evren, is that right?
Yeah, so that's the plan. And of course, the master of Slack is Mr. Göksel. So
we have created this Slack channel, actually. Name is Parliamentary right now. And after your tag, we will add you to this channel. And after then, Iman will facilitate the process for the beginning.
Yes.
But Sister Iman, actually, I was just talking to there, Mr. Göksel. If you have some colleagues from Georgetown who can maybe volunteer to give some, like when you are doing the breakout rooms, it might be a good idea just maybe to get some of their support to kind of acquaint our students, participants of DPCH. Of course, everything right now I'm talking about is kind of predicated on the fact that there's going to be demand for it. But I trust our group, actually. I'm sure there's going to be demand. But the question is how much, you know, like how many of them. So I hope this will be of interest among the participants of DPCH, because a parliamentary debate is a very strong tool and also important skill, actually, to kind of instigate your ideas, converse with others, and empower your negotiation skills, right? And many other kind of relevant sub skills. So what you do is really important to us. We really cherish and appreciate what you do. Thank you so much, Iman. And so what do we do for how much time they have right now to declare their interest?
Yeah, let's see. Would 3 days be enough?
Yeah, maybe until the next Monday.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that'll be good.
So when they tag themselves, do they mention what role they would like to undertake, or no?
So originally the plan was that you would just be put into teams randomly, because both sides, so the debate topics have been made so that either side of the debate is very debatable, so you won't be left without points or anything. And I think it's more exciting that way. You know, my personal preference is just say you want to be part of the debate, and then we'll put you into teams randomly.
Okay, so we already have one interested person, Fatma actually declared, but please, Fatma, it's okay here, but also do it on Slack so that we can trace. Thank you, Iman. This is wonderful.
My pleasure. Actually, there is one more part. I don't know if we can get to it now, or we could run it on Slack. But I wanted you guys to vote on the debate motion. Because there's 4 that we managed to narrow it down to. I don't know. Do we have time for this, or today's?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, like time is okay. No worries.
Okay. All right. Cool. So I didn't set up a poll for this. But maybe let's see. I think we could just, if you guys want to vote, drop it into the chat, and then I'll just count the number of, you know, I'll take my time to count the number of votes that we have. So tell me the number that you want. Yep.
Yeah. Also, what we can do is maybe, Mr. Göksel, we can put this on Slack as a poll, and this way everybody can choose.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
That's actually a lot easier, I think.
I take a screenshot right now. Yeah, let's continue.
All right, so I'll just lead you guys through it and explain what the different premises would be. So the first one you can vote for is this house. The first motion topic is that this house believes that all schools should reopen once the vaccine is available. That's number 1. Number 2 is this house believes that governments should immediately invest more in preventing the next global pandemic. Number 3 is this house believes that healthcare workers should be the first to be vaccinated against COVID-19. And the 4th is that social distancing guidelines should remain in place throughout 2021. So vote on those. And basically the government will debate on this motion. And then the opposition will say the opposition believes that all schools should not reopen once the vaccine is available. just negate it, right? Like just say the negative of that. That's what the opposition will be debating. So again, guys, no need to vote here. Feel free to vote afterwards. And we'll be, yeah, feel free to vote on Slack. That's where we'll actually be collecting it. So we can put up, actually, Gorsel will be helping that. Thank you helping us with that. Thank you very much.
Voting is up.
Yeah, and just okay. So someone did mention that the general chat is put on read only. So I assume they should do it on the supplies channel. Is that where they should? Do I have that right?
Yep, dear Fatima, in your team channel, please.
Okay. Okay, in your team channel.
Yeah.
All right, my bad. Sorry, I've just gotten acquainted with Slack, so I'm taking a little bit of time. All right, so that's it for me. Again, if you have any questions, I know that there were some questions that were directed to me privately, so feel free to send it to me on Slack. My name is Iman Ismail on Slack as well, so I'll be there if you have any questions. If you want to talk about some of the, the debate styles or the opportunities to debate or any practice that you want, or any more information, please do let me know. And I'm super excited to be working with you guys. I hope you enjoyed. I hope it didn't go too quickly. Oh, and here's my email as well, if anyone wants to reach out. Thank you very much.
And dear Iman.
Thank you, everyone. And see you tomorrow. And Mr. Göksel will be sharing with you, I guess.
Of course.
For tomorrow, we have a really amazing professor, Dr. Joseph Mary, and a very exciting project from US called Thirst Project. Yeah. A group of American individuals, American youth actually, doing wells all over the world for water problem. Don't miss out, okay?
See you soon, guys. Bye-bye.
Cheers, bye. Bye.